in the recording. So hello, today here we are having the fifth session of the program that connects TESOL Italy and TESOL Ukraine, and it is called Sharing Contexts Between Cultures. And I am so happy to present our speakers today. I'm not presenting them, to welcome our speakers today. They are the people who initiated this program, and that's why we always want to thank them, but we'll do it in the end. So please, who will be introducing you?
Marina, I will be introducing them.
Yes, I thought so, Maria Grazia.
As a TESOL Italy president, I'm really delighted to welcome today some special guest speakers giving inspiring talks on Oracy. Let me briefly introduce them, starting from Professor Neil Mercer. We are very honored for the opportunity of having you here today as our guest speaker. And you are, Neil Mercer is Emeritus Professor of Education at the University of Cambridge and Director of Oracy Cambridge, the Center for Effective Spoken Communication at the Cambridge College TESOL. He's a psychologist whose research has focused on the development of children's spoken language and the reasoning abilities and teachers' role in that development. He has worked extensively and internationally with the teachers, researchers, and educational policymakers. He was given the Oeuvre Award by the European Association for Research into Learning and Instruction and the John Nisbet Fellowship by the British Educational Research Association for outstanding contribution to educational research. His books include The Words and Minds and Intertaking, Putting Talk to Work. Before leaving you the floor, Professor, let me introduce also our colleagues and friends and special guests, Lisa and Sarah, belonging to the TESOL Italy community, so that we can give all the space to you and your presentations. Sarah Howell is an ELT author, adjunct professor at Università Politecnica delle Marche and second vice president for TESOL Italy. She is also a Voice 21 international Oracy leader. Sarah has been running CPD sessions and courses for teachers for over 30 years and offers specialist Oracy intervention with students and teachers in schools across Italy. In 2021, in response to the pandemic, Sarah co-created the Oracy Italy group to support teachers in developing talk in their schools so that all students may reap the benefits of an Oracy-rich education. She has published extensively for primary and secondary ELT in more than 40 countries. Lisa Kester-Dodgson is an author, Voice 21 international Oracy leader, TESOL Italy Executive Committee member, teacher and teacher trainer. She has been involved in ELT and teacher training since 1990 and has published widely for both the primary and secondary sector in a variety of countries. She offers Oracy-oriented CPD courses for teachers as well as Oracy projects for students. Last year, she co-created the Oracy Italy group to support teachers on their Oracy journey. So, Professor Nye, now it's up to you. So the floor is yours, and please join me in welcoming Neil Mercer.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay out there?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, it's a real privilege to be invited to join you. I really do appreciate it. And I know, especially for the people in Ukraine, I just want you to know that all my colleagues and I have such sympathy for the situation you're in, and especially that you're trying to continue your work in education under these circumstances. And every day we look, for a hopeful outcome, and we just hope we can do what we can. And certainly my college, Howell, is making special efforts to help Ukrainian students. In fact, some have helped them get back to the UK. Who were stuck there. So, we do understand the circumstances, and I think it's great that you're continuing your work, and we hope for the best. So Sarah asked me if I would just say a bit about Oracy. why it's important. It seems a bit crazy having to justify Oracy to a group of language teachers, but it's not really us that need convincing, is it? It's the world that needs convincing, and often it's policymakers who need convincing. The word Oracy itself, as you perhaps know, was invented in the 1960s by Professor Andrew Wilkinson, who was a professor of education in the UK. And he invented it because he felt there wasn't really a word that gave spoken language the same status in education as literacy. So you've got literacy and numeracy. And then what have you got? You've got talk, chat, speaking, listening. And it's the same in other languages, isn't it? There's not really quite such a strong word associated with the effective use and development of spoken language skills. So he invented this word. You know, you can see how it fits. And it's taken some time for his desire, for that effect really to happen. In fact, he's had a few false starts, but certainly in very recent years, I think Oracy has started to be taken more seriously in many parts of the world. I mean, one of the countries I think that's it's not a very big one, but I think it's leading the world in some ways, is Wales, part of the United Kingdom, but a separate nation, has just made Oracy a significant part officially of its new national curriculum. And we've been part of that. We've helped them develop that. And they're a bilingual nation, which you probably know. They speak Welsh and English, and both languages are in schools. And that's relevant, I think, to what I'm going to say. I've been talking about this kind of thing for a long time. I mean, I've been a long time working in this field. And I feel a lot more confident about what I can say now than if I was talking, say, 20 or so years ago, because research has really moved on in many ways to help us understand why spoken language is so important. We now know, for example, that spoken language is much more crucially involved in the development of children's reasoning and their cognition than used to be thought the case. It's through children's interaction, largely through spoken language with other people, that they learn how the world is made up, how the world is. They don't just experience the world, they experience people talking about it, explaining it, them asking questions and finding out about it. So we know it's more important. And we also know that one obvious sign of deprivation, social deprivation in children, is if they come to school with very limited spoken language skills. And so we know that it makes a big difference. And we also know that those limited skills can hinder their progress. Even if they just come to school with those limited skills, it can still have some effect on their progress when they're 13 or 14 in their education. And what I have to say, I always say it to our education students at Cambridge when they're training to be teachers. I said that would be a horrible story. You know, these poor little children, they come to school with underdeveloped language skills, and that's their future set. I said it would be true, except for one thing, that's you, teachers. Teachers are the only second chance for many children to develop spoken language skills. And it's a big responsibility, but I'm afraid it's the case. So, as I say, we know a lot more about it, and we know a lot more about what can be done about it now, and I'll say a little bit about that. So when it comes to Oracy, there are really two aspects of Oracy, kind of two sides of the same coin, which you can't separate, but it's worth looking at them separately, I think. One of them is learning how to talk. Okay. That's what we're on about. Just as literacy education is learning how to read and write, learning how to talk, Oracy education is about learning how to speak and listen. Okay. So that's one of the things, developing students' spoken language skills. That's what we're talking about there. That's one side of the coin. The other side is learning through talk, because talk is the medium of education. It's through talk that many education events happen. I mean, this is a kind of education event, isn't it? And if I just stop speaking now, it stopped. The event stopped, because it depends on talk. And as James Britton, who was a very famous educational researcher when I was a student said that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. And I think it's worth giving talk the primacy that it should have, and which tends to not be the case in many education systems throughout the world still. And we know that young people can be taught how to use spoken language more effectively in different social contexts. There are different settings in which the effective use of spoken language matters, and it involves skills which not everybody will naturally develop. One of them is this: making a presentation. I hope I'm doing it well. You'll be the judges, but it's a case of, am I judging, am I getting the level of understanding of my audience right? Am I speaking at the right speed? Am I speaking clearly enough? Is my Northern English accent accessible to you all? I think it is. Better than the Southern English accent. It's a lot better. And these things can be taught. You can teach somebody how to make a good presentation. Likewise, equally important are the skills involved in working in teams or groups. And many people haven't got those skills naturally. I don't know about you, but I've been in lots of staff meetings in the university and other places where people don't know how to work in a meeting. You know, they drive you mad because they don't have the skills. And there are some very specific skills to enable people to work well in teams, which lots of employers want and are very important to solving the world's problems. Scientists in laboratories, people working in government committees, people trying to solve social problems in their communities, they all need those skills. And likewise, the skills of a teacher, helping someone to learn. That's a set of Oracy skills as well. So it's these kind of different contexts in which we can help students to learn how to use spoken language well. And the other interesting thing, I think, from point of view of language teachers, people who are teaching students another language, is that most Oracy skills aren't language specific. Although languages vary, as we all know, in grammar and lexicon and so on, and that there are some cultural differences between how you behave when you're speaking to people, lots of the skills involved in spoken language use are the same. My Spanish isn't that great, but I've given lectures in Spanish in Latin America and in Spain. And I know the same principles are involved in making a good lecture in Spanish as are in English. There are certain things I ought to be doing which will make it work. And the same would apply to teaching and learning. A Japanese teacher needs the same skills as an English teacher in some ways to make it work. So these things, I think it's important that we're talking about something that transcends one language. Oracy is something which we can talk about in terms of language. I think that's important. Although there will be local and cultural differences, which you'll be aware of, which we obviously need to help students understand if they're moving from one culture or one country to another. So it's because all these various skills are involved, and that the area was not so well mapped out as when it comes to literacy, that we decided to create, with Voice 21, we at the University of Cambridge created the Oracy Skills Framework, in which for the first time we tried to set down all the skills that would be involved in different kinds of contexts in which spoken language was used. There were different skills. There were the linguistic skills of choosing the right words, using the right grammar and so on. There are the cognitive skills of organizing the content so it makes sense. There are the physical skills such as projecting your voice appropriately, using the right body language and so on. And so there are these different kinds of, and there are social skills of taking account of your audience and taking account of the cultural norms of the setting in which you're in. So it seemed worth separating these out, even if in any one situation you don't need all of them. You never do. If you're on the phone, body language is irrelevant, isn't it, for example? But it's useful to have them all set out. So if you Google Oracy Skills Framework, it'll come up and you'll find it up there, and I think most people have found it very useful because it sets out all these skills. And then you can see with your students if some of them, their profiles are such that they have some skills well developed and some aren't. and that you've focused more on some in the past than others. So the Oracy Skills Framework, I think, is a useful thing. We found it useful, and we created it by involving lots of experts. We didn't just sit in, and think it up. We actually looked around and found what was there. So when it comes to Oracy education, that is learning how to talk, teaching students how to talk, I think that's useful. And if you look on our site and on the Voice 21 site, website, you'll find lots of useful resources to do with teaching, expressly teaching Oracy, like you teach maths, like you teach history, you teach Oracy. So that's something which, as I say, language teachers, it's not so important to say it to you, but to many other kinds of teachers, maths teachers and so on, they may not realise how much language, spoken language, is important for what they do. So that's one side of the coin, that's learning how to talk, Oracy education. In relation to the other side of the coin, the learning through talk, we know a lot more from recent school-based research in classrooms about how important it is that teachers use and organise talk in the classrooms for learning to happen effectively for their students. This is not something, taken from psychological experiments or whatever and transferred in. This is stuff done in real classrooms, looking at whether the way some teachers use talk got better learning outcomes than other teachers who were using talk in different ways. We carried out the largest project ever in primary education in the world in the last 4 years. We carried out that in Cambridge, and we found some things. And another large project was carried out at the University of York, which was also on primary schools. And it also showed got very similar findings, which I'll say a bit about. And although these are obviously first language classrooms, many of the classrooms involved were classrooms in which there were students who were learning English as part of their education. Because as you'll know, in many parts of the UK, you've got lots of people in school who haven't got English as their first language. So what do we know from this? For example, in our project, we had 80 teachers. We simply asked them to teach how they would normally teach maths, science and English. And we said, let's just see what they do, and if we can relate what they do to the outcomes of their students when they took the national standardised tests at the end of the year. And what we found were there were certain things that if the teachers did more of them, they got better results, and they got happier students, by the way, students who seem to be more actively involved in the classroom. And the other project, the one led by Robin Alexander at the University of York, got more or less the same results by using a different approach. So what are the main results from this? And I think they apply in other settings just as much as in those ones we were looking at specifically. Okay, first, we can say that direct instruction, when you simply talk to students, tell them things that they don't know, like I may be doing a little bit, at least to you now, it's great. Don't let anybody tell you that that's not a good way to teach. Direct instruction is important. You're the expert. They don't know, you know. They'll only find out from you some things. So if you're good at it, this is where your Oracy skills come in. If you're good at making clear, succinct presentations of new knowledge for students, that's absolutely vital for them. So don't worry about providing direct instruction. Perhaps you weren't doing, but some teachers do get concerned. They've been told that this isn't the right thing to do. So to work well, it needs a teacher to have well-developed Oracy skills, to be a good public speaker, really, to be someone who can take account of the needs of their audience, of the level of understanding of their audience, so they don't pitch it too high or too low. And they can take account of what they know about what the students have learned already and where they're going to talk about something that will make total sense in the middle. And that's what good teachers do. So that's one of the things. Direct instruction's good, but it's not the only thing that you need to do, that good teachers do. As I say, what we did was we looked at what good teachers do, and then we try and distill the essence of it. The other thing that really good teachers do is they balance direct instruction with what we might call interactive dialogue with their students. In other words, they specifically organise some sessions in which students engage in dialogue with the teachers and with each other, in which they are expected and allowed and encouraged to do more than just give the right answer to a question, in which they themselves can ask questions, in which they can actually say, you know, I don't understand, can you explain that more? Or why is that really the right answer? I don't see why. Or can, you know, they shouldn't feel nervous in doing that. Funnily enough, Robin Alexander, I said around the other project, he did some cross-cultural research, and one of those was he compared classrooms in Russia with those in the UK, in England. And in maths classes, he found that Russian students tend to get better results in maths than in England. One of the things he found, it was more normal in Russian classrooms for students to feel they could express misunderstandings. They say, I just don't understand. In England, if the teacher said, anybody not understand, they just go, put their down. Just keep a low profile. So you know, there you are. That's a little bit of this evidence that actually compared those two settings. So it's a balance between direct instruction and interactive dialogue. That's what the best teaching involves, which the students practice their language skills. They're having to think on their feet. When you see them, I've got some transcripts from language classrooms, some of which were in Russia, some of which are in other parts, some of them in the UK, some in the Netherlands and so on. And you can see that sometimes from the filled pauses in the transcripts when the students are going, well, I think that they're having to think on their feet. They're trying to think what word in English or whatever target language they're struggling for they have to use. And that's really good for them. It's better, it's different than just hearing that word, isn't it? We all know that. So that's kind of interactive dialogue is important. So they should be encouraged to ask questions, to respond to each other, and leading those kind of sessions is itself an Oracy skill, you know, skilled activity for teachers. It takes perhaps a bit of doing, and I know trainee teachers say that it takes them a while to know how to do that well. It's not something you can necessarily organise a good session like that straight away. So then it's a case then of balancing those two things. And the other thing we found is that well-organised group work is really great. If you can organise group work, students working in, say, groups of 3, and in a language classroom, working in the target language, if you can encourage them to do so, that it's really dynamite, it's wonderful, because they will have to try and use language forms, trying to hear each other. It doesn't matter if they're not using it perfectly, that's not the point. Sorry, for some reason it went off. I don't know. Can you hear me now again? Yeah, great. So in the we found that group work really matters, and that applies in language classrooms as well. But it only works. This is the other side as well. It'll only work well if you teach them how to have a reasoned discussion. In other words, how to be able to use language to work together. The very thing I mentioned earlier in the other side of the coin. And they have to be taught how to use exploratory talk. This is what we normally call it. In America, they call it accountable talk. We're stuck with the two terms, but they mean more or less the same thing. And we have devised ways of teaching students how to use exploratory talk, and it's the stuff of reasoned discussion in any language. Again, just Google it, and you'll find things come up. Exploratory talk. Okay. And so group work is great, it really helps, but only if they're taught how to do it. In other words, to use language, to think collaboratively, to think collectively, because that is an important skill for their own education and for their lives. So that's really the essence of what we do in Oracy Cambridge, and what Voice 21 do as well. Their work's very much based on the same research, including ours. And we are really trying to encourage an evidence-based use of talk in schools, and encourage the explicit teaching of these spoken language skills to students throughout the world. And we have now, we've worked with, a couple of us have done seminars in Italy on Oracy. We've done them in Holland. We've done them, some of our colleagues have done them in Australia, America, New Zealand, Iceland, you know, various places. And so I think there is a groundswell of interest in the world, which I think we can all build on now. And I hope you can join this. And I'm sure I know some of you are already, from what Sarah said. So I look forward to hearing more from you. And please look at the Oracy Cambridge website. You'll find that easily. Look at the Voice 21 website. You might look at the English Speaking Union website too, because we work with them as well, and they've got some very interesting things up there. And if you want any more information, well, yeah, I'm easily found. My email's up there online and everything on the website, and you can get in touch. So it's been great to talk to you. I hope I've got it right. I hope you know, my Oracy skills lived up to the needs of this occasion. And if not, I'm very willing to have some feedback, because we know that's how people learn. So thanks for your attention, and I'll pass back now to the chair, to Maria. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Marina, could we share our screen?
Yes, you are allowed to share your screen.
Yes, it would be if you could, all of us can anybody share a screen?
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't all share your screens. That's the end. Did you do a screen share for the video as well? Did you click the video thing as well? Yes, I think I did. Oh, let's do it again, just in case I didn't. Yes, I did. Okay. We're just a bit nervous at the moment because having Professor Mercer in the room is like either being pulled up onto a stage by Bruce Springsteen. That's what my son said. He said, Mom, it's like Bruce Springsteen pulling you up on the stage. And the other one said, it's like getting an assist in a basketball match from LeBron. It just doesn't happen. So I think, yeah, we're just a bit nervous. But we thought we're going to go through some activities and strategies that we used in a project last year, trying to get senior management and the rest of the staff to buy into embedding Oracy across the curriculum. And we thought, and we still think, it's a great idea to start from English language teaching, because we have so much knowledge about language. And so I'm going to show you some of the strategies we used. And we do have one of the project leads in the house today, which is Enrica Cerconi. So maybe Enrica at the end will say hello to us. There she is. Enrica is also a big fan of Professor Mercer. So here we are, Oracy in action. Really just first steps towards offering an Oracy approach. So we'd like to show you some snippets of a project we worked on. Perhaps you'd like to.
Yes. Okay, a project we worked on last year in a school called the Liceo Giacomo Leopardi in Recanati here in Italy. It's an upper secondary school, and we worked with two classes, a second year Linguistico and a first year Scientifico. There were approximately 45 students across the two classes. We started the project just after the first lockdown, when schools had opened back up. And in this particular school, they were working with 50% of the students in class and 50% online from the same class, and they swapped every week. It was the second term of school, and the first year class hadn't got to know their classmates in person because it was their first year at school. So there was a real need to help build the class community. And regarding the teaching staff, there were 3 EFL class teachers. 2 of them were in class and 1 was online. And there were 2 Oracy leads, Sarah and myself.
Okay, and one of the class teachers is Enrica. So we started by working on the topic of Oracy with the teachers, and we created a focus group where we explored Oracy as a term, as a concept, and we had to look at what the teachers were already doing in the classroom in both ELT and in other subjects. And we worked on the Oracy Skills Framework, which Neil mentioned earlier, in some detail. We used the version that they have on the Oracy Cambridge website that also has a glossary. I think it's quite important because you can download the framework quite easily, but the part with the glossary actually expands the various points, so you really get a good idea of what the different terms are. And we had a good look, and then we thought it would be best to focus on two strands of the framework, so on the physical strand and the social emotional strand, because these students were actually just getting to know each other, getting back into the classroom, and we really wanted them to reconnect with spoken language with each other. And we also introduced the teachers to a Voice 21 document, the Rsc Benchmarks, which really just highlights, well, it outlines what it means to provide a high quality Oracy education, both at a classroom level, so there are the teachers' benchmarks, but also at a whole school level, because the idea is to move this project into other subject areas. So starting with English, but not losing sight of involving management and offering a school-wide approach.
So during our first session, we asked the students to complete a questionnaire about speaking and listening in their school. We asked them questions about how they felt about talking in class, how much speaking they actually did, what kind of activities they did, and how they made them feel, how much they learned from each other, how much group discussion they took part in. And the responses were very interesting indeed, and they gave us lots and lots of insight into the culture of talk that already existed in these classes and how the students actually perceived classroom talk. The results were a real eye-opener for teachers too. And with this information, we were more able to plan specific intervention, and we felt it important to introduce the teachers to various research publications, including Neil Mercer's, of course, to enable them to look at this small sample of data in a wider perspective.
Mm-hmm. And you could, these kind of, the questionnaire that we offered, we adapted to our local context, but they are the kind of questionnaires that you can find on a variety of Oracy websites. We then created some discussion guidelines with our students. This took up quite a few lessons actually, as we thought it was very important to dedicate some time to this. Discussion guidelines are a set of rules which are best really if they're created by the students rather than actually dictated top down by the teacher. And they sort of govern classroom discussion, and they help create a safe environment where students can express their thoughts and feelings without feeling threatened. Most of the testing, or a lot of the testing in Italy, is oral testing. So sometimes speaking and discussing things. Some students are sometimes hesitant, reluctant speakers, and we wanted to create these guidelines so that we could have a more sort of inclusive type of conversation, but also, really trying to create this culture of talk in the classroom. And through the discussion guidelines, the students gradually come to realise that they can offer these partial answers or incorrect ideas, and that they can discuss them and expand upon them with other members of their group. So what we did was we created a Padlet, because as Lisa said, half the students were at home and half of them were in the classroom, and then they alternated every other week. We wanted them to work together so that they all felt included in the construction of these guidelines, and that they all had a voice in these. So we mixed the groups. 2 were at home with their mobile phones or on Zoom or on WhatsApp, and 2 are in class, and they had video chats together. So they had this group of 4 students. And here is an example of the class discussion guidelines. Before they actually created them, obviously, they weren't that aware of what the norms are for good discussion. So we showed them some examples of good talk and possibly bad talk, and got them to jot down their examples. And then they, in a sort of think, pair, share discussion, they thought about what they thought were good norms and bad norms and produced them. And then afterwards, they wrote them up on the Padlet, and then as a homework task, they voted on the norms that they thought would be the best for our set of class discussion guidelines. So they could put in as many stars as they liked to as many rules as they wanted. Actually very similar, so they obviously thought similar things, but we did say to them that this is our sort of starter set of guidelines, and that the more we discuss things, the more we're going to understand about talk, and that we had the intentions of adapting these every month and seeing if we felt the same things. And we also fed in over time some of the discussion guideline samples that we found on the Thinking Together project, which I'll mention at the end, because there's a huge amount of information on that project, and it helps if sometimes you sort of direct them in the area of a discussion guideline that perhaps they hadn't thought about. So this was our first sort of set with them, and the yellow column was the most voted guidelines. Okay.
Okay. So in order to identify the strategies needed for scaffolding and developing talk, we referred to the Oracy framework. The Oracy framework, as Neil said, it outlines the elements which underpin successful communication skills and provides a useful tool for analysing speech, which helped us to put strategies in place to improve specific skills and the speaking and listening skills. In the framework, the skills are divided into 4 different interrelated categories or strands: the physical, the linguistic, the cognitive, and the social and emotional. The version with the glossary is very useful as it gives lots of insights into the various strands, as Sarah said.
Yeah.
And once the framework has been explained to the students, it can be put up on the wall, and different strands should be referred to during class discussions, and activities can be planned around the various strands. The framework is available in Arabic, English, Italian, which we translated with Professoressa Enrica Cerquoni, as we said, who's here today, and Welsh, and with Chinese and Spanish coming soon. And Ukrainian? Any offers?
That's a shout out for TESOL Ukraine. If there was one.
As any Oracy instruction to be effective needs to be a whole school approach. I would certainly suggest using bilingual versions with colleagues. It isn't just an English thing.
Okay. And there's a link at the bottom there. We're sending, Marina, actually, we'll send you a PDF of this, because then you have the links to the various documents if people want to click on them. I think you can just Google them as well. They're quite easy to find.
Yes.
You can move the slide forward.
Yes, it's
stuck.
Yes, it's just frozen. Hang on, let's just see. Maybe. Yeah, let's see. Ah, there we are. Oh, there we are.
Okay, it must be our connection.
Yes.
Okay. So the next step, so we set our discussion guidelines. The next step was actually elevating the quality of talk in our conversations, in our discussions. And we thought it was important to spend time making the students aware of their different contributions within a discussion, and how perhaps we can make use some tactics to make these more explicit. The contributions could be more educationally productive within the discussion. So talk tactics, or sometimes they're called talk moves. These are some examples of 6 different tactics. So here we have an instigator, a prober, a challenger, a clarifier, a summarizer, and a builder. And we can use these in small, actual little cards that we give out to the students, and we sent them an electronic copy at home, and they assigned the roles themselves within groups. And each tactic, and I think they like the term tactic here because it reminded a lot of the students about football and how they have tactics within a football match. So and they were given their cards, and they had to play their role and exchange these, and sometimes use 1 or 2 roles within the conversation, and just build them up over time. And they include sentence stems. You know, that these are the words at the beginning of the sentence that really help them start a conversation and maintain the conversation. But it also gives them a direction in the conversation. And helps them to structure their ideas. And we found this particularly useful with students that have been reluctant to join in with the conversations, because it actually, it gives them a way in, and it takes away the initial anxiety that they might be feeling about joining in the conversation. You've got this way in, and then you can just really concentrate on what you really want to say, rather than concentrate on how to get into the conversation. And again, we used a couple of these because it was a short project, and we used 2 or 3, and then the class teachers continued using them.
Okay, so there are several ways that the Oracy framework can be used to help students and teachers reflect on their Oracy skills, and talk detectives is one of these. So choosing 1 or 2 talk detectives to monitor the quality of talk in classroom discussion is a really useful way to see how students use the different strands of the framework. The detectives walk around the classroom, listening to the group's discussions, and fill in a talk detective checklist. This is a chart with talk focus questions linked to the skills that they're focusing on. They jot down anything they notice in any language they like, but without disturbing the other students. Then, when the discussions are over, they report their findings back to the class, and students actually learn to frame their feedback in a really positive way to their classmates, and they're able to pick out good examples of talk. And this allows the teacher to see their students' strengths and any areas which may need further development. Here we can see 2 talk detectives in action, and everybody benefited from the experience as it helped them understand which skills they needed to improve in order to have a more effective group discussion, and offered some good examples to be modelled. Some of the quieter speakers were delighted to have examples of their speech reported back to the class. And when it was their turn to monitor and give feedback, they took the role on really willingly.
Yeah, we had students who really didn't want to speak at all. And then when they took on the role of talk detectives, things sort of changed. Of course, talk detectives can be used at any age. I use them at university when we're doing online lessons with Zoom, and we have, I split them into breakout rooms, and then I assign somebody, the task of jumping in and becoming the talk detective. And it keeps everybody on track, and it's a good way of reflecting on their discussion, on their interventions.
And even in primary school they can put a little policeman's hat on.
There were some examples online about that. So the final part of the project, which wasn't the focus of the project, the focus was actually developing the part of exploratory talk, holding these good discussions where the students start sort of learning from each other and really developing their ideas and their thinking together. That was our main focus. The final part actually focused more on presentational discourse, which we wanted to move away from the idea initially of presentational discourse, because they do so much of that in Italy for the oral tests. So we wanted to really focus on, before we get to our presentational part, we would like to focus on the exploratory talk. But we thought it was important to give the teachers, an idea of the other side, actually, rather than learning through talk, the actual learning to talk. So we offered a little speech making part. We called it actually a speech making module for the students. And we started by showing the students short motivational clips of different speakers from around the world with different accents, to encourage them not to worry about their accents, and show them like celebrities, film stars, famous people with beautiful English, with accents from all over the world. We really wanted them to feel, proud of the way they spoke English. And we gave them a questionnaire on presentations, which actually a lot of came back about their anxiety to speak in front of the public, and their concerns about their pronunciation. So we really wanted to get rid of this part. It was extremely useful for us to see a before and after point through the questionnaires, what they felt about before this speech making experience, and afterwards the confidence that they had gained. The students worked in groups. Again, we had our mixed groups online and in class. We had a look at a framework from Voice 21 for presentation skills. And they discussed their various topics for their presentations, and they were sharing and learning about each other's passions and interests in small discussion groups. And once they'd chosen their topic, they decided on the topic they wanted to present. They discussed it in their groups, and each one of them filled in a feedback form, not feedback form for the others, but the feedback that they'd obtained from the group. So we could see, and if they were happy with the amount of feedback that they received, then they were able to go off and work on their presentation. If not, they would carry on discussing until they'd really got enough to work with. And then we scaffold the writing phase through the use of planning templates, sentence stems and presentation checklists. And there was a lot of practicing in the classroom in pairs, in groups of 4, building their confidence, and we were really focusing on the physical aspects of the framework. Almost finished. About a minute.
Okay. Okay, so then we organised an event we called a Spark event, where the students gave their 2-minute presentations to the 2 classes and to the other teachers. And it was a good opportunity to show teachers how confident the students were feeling about presenting and the types of skills they had acquired for this part, although we wanted to make sure that this was not the main focus of the project.
So we didn't want it to become like the school play, that everybody focuses on the performance and you know, it doesn't really matter what happens, just as long as I do my part. And we really wanted, so we didn't actually tell them about the event until we'd actually worked through and we got our speeches ready and they perfected them in the class. And we said, well, by the way, you know, why don't we do a little event? And then we wanted to offer you some reflections, but we would like to offer you the reflections of one of the students, because we think that's the best way to hear about how successful the project was or wasn't. And this is Thomas, who came up with his reflections. I put them on a couple of them on the slide, just in case somebody's connecting up from home and they can't see the video. But there's a 1-minute video that we'd like to show you with Thomas, and we hope you can hear it. Okay. Put your thumb up, Marina, if you hear it properly. Can you hear it?
No.
Okay. I need to mute.
Mute this one over.
Yeah.
The audio of that. Okay. Oh, sorry, but probably it would help if you could. Yeah, now we can hear. Yeah, thank you.
About what my class and I learned doing the Rsc Voice 21 project. Personally, I really liked it because I had the opportunity to improve my public speaking skills. But my class and I loved the fact that we could talk about specific subjects. And this thing isn't often asked to us during normal lessons. So having the opportunity to talk about specific topics and express all our emotions has been great. Public speaking is one of the most important abilities to learn. So my class and I would be very, very happy if we could continue this project even the next year. Concluding, I would like to thank Professoressa Erika Cepponi, Elisabetta Lombarini, Howell, and Lisa Kester-Dodgson to giving us the opportunity to participate in this project. Hoping we could continue it even the next year. Thank you for listening, and Thomas Williams.
Okay, so yeah, that was just the testimonial. We thought that was amazing, and we had the headmaster there, so it was this is guaranteed that they're going to invest in Oracy, because they actually had the students, and he was just representative of the whole group, but they had some of the most amazing speeches on really profound topics. And I think one of the things, as an ELT coursebook writer, I think I would never have got that in the books that we have at this level, the kind of materials that they produced themselves and they really wanted to speak about, you know, leaving aside all the language functions that we have to go through and the grammar. They really were communicating, and if they hadn't done all that exploratory talk, they wouldn't have got to this. That was our take home. And
okay, let's see if we can. No, we've got a. There we are.
That was just the last slide of things that we've mentioned. Cambridge Oracy, obviously we've got the director of Cambridge Oracy. Well, that was our first go-to place when we started getting involved and passionate about Oracy, and realised really how important it is. And we used to close, I always used to close with the quote, "School is a child's second chance," which is Neil Mercer's quote. But I've noticed since then that he uses it in all his talks. So I changed the quote for today. But I really do believe that school is, at all levels, it's a student's second chance. Voice 21, a UK charity, Thinking Together project. There's a lot of materials on the Thinking Together project and lots of different case studies and things to really get into, you know, Oracy before perhaps starting a project in your own school. And then our little Facebook group that we created with teachers who are interested. And if any of the Ukraine teachers want to join this discussion group, I'll change the name to Oracy International or something like that. And that's the end, if Lisa would like to stop sharing. And just a quote with Stephen Hawking, but I think we can cut that because of time.
Yeah.
I think everybody probably knows it anyway.
Okay.
And so questions, we'd like all your questions to be directed at Neil Mercer, because we haven't got much time, and you know, he's our LeBron of Oracy. So and I don't know, Marina and Maria Grazia, if you collected questions.
First of all, thank you so much to all the presenters for their brilliant presentations. So there are some congrats in the chat, and Irina asked Professor Mercer, you know, more than a question is that she found, maybe she can speak. I know that Irina likes to intervene every time, so please, Marina, I think it's better to if possibly, if people can make questions directly to the speakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a question from Irina Lashenko. Irina, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. And I'm immensely grateful for this really fresh breath of air. And that is really, that is brilliant presentation and fundamental and handy, sorry. And I have some questions. So may I ask Professor Neil Mercer? Well, thank you very much for your insight on developing Oracy. And as you mentioned, that the skills are most fundamental ideas in building Oracy. So nevertheless, which language you can speak, you may be a skillful presenter, depending on your social skills, and one of the most important component is collaborative and social component as well. So do you think this is innate ability, and not everyone is available to attain the skills, to acquire this the skills? So do you think it may depend on exactly the cognitive level, or what other cognitive, or not cognitive, what other hurdles in building, designing the course on speaking, and assessing, in building the flow on teaching Oracy is possible to suggest here?
I think that people will probably naturally vary in how good they are when they come to school, or when they've gone to a certain age, in doing certain things with spoken language, as they would with mathematics or written language or whatever, or sport. But I think like those things, we can all get better. And I don't think anybody should assume that you can't become a good public speaker just because you're not one already. And I think, just as I say, I would never be a good player of football, but I could get better if I had the right instruction. And I think that's what we can offer. And I think, like, for example, some people say, oh, well, some people are shy. They're not natural extroverts. They don't want to be public speakers. Well, I know some teachers who are not party people. They're shy people. They don't like those kind of events. But they've learnt the skill of holding a class, being entertaining, being effective in front of a class, and they can do it because they've developed those skills. So I think we shouldn't really accept that these things are innate to the extent that you can't significantly improve with the right guidance. And I think it's the same with other kinds of skills. I mean, I remember, people say, oh, I can't sing or I can't play music, I'm tone deaf. And I remember one primary teacher who I worked with, not only was she working with Oracy, she said, I've got a class of children who are 9 years old and none of them are tone deaf. They can all sing in tune because I've taught them how to do it. And I think that's the same with all these skills. I think we can all become better. So I think we should assume we can all significantly improve if we're given the right support and teaching.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And may I ask another question to Lisa and Sarah also? And well, thank you very much for handy advice and all this presentation. And I wonder whether, well, you demonstrated your questionnaire on speaking skills. Well, I wonder whether has it been published somewhere? Is it the research, and whether it's possible to get the results of that? Well.
No, it hasn't. Yes, you can have the results. I'll send them to you. No, it hasn't been published. It was really just a sort of a classroom research project for us to inform our own teaching. But I'll happily share it because you might like to use the questions with your students, and it might be useful. Yeah. But I think everyone sort of would adapt it to their own context, really.
Yeah, well, thank you. And another question here was, so when we had the possibility to see that brilliant presentation, the last of this, that is this Spark event on 2 minutes presentation on one of your students. So even without deeping into some details, it's clearly obvious that this person is freely communicative and on high level of presentation. How do you assess this presentation? Do you have special, well, I mean, the rubrics or so? Yeah.
Oh, that's a question for Professor Mercer. Assessment is a can of worms for spoken English.
Yeah, assessing Oracy is difficult. It's harder than assessing, say, writing, because you've got the writing written down, the student's written work is there, and you can look at it and put it down and pick it up. It involves looking at things like videos and so on. But we have, if you look on our website, you will actually see that we do talk about how ways you can make assessments. If you look on the Oracy Skills Framework website, you'll actually see examples of assessment sheets we've got there where you can score students in terms of their body language, their projection of their voice, the clarity of their the content of their presentation, for example. And there are ways that when we do training of teachers, when we do in-service training, we and Voice 21, we do offer specific sessions on assessing Oracy, and I think there are ways of doing this in ways that are helpful to the teachers and helpful to the students to help them find out what their profiles are and what they're good at and what they need to develop. So it is possible, but you're right, it's a difficult thing. Yeah,
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Professor Mercer. And well, I'm awfully sorry, I see Ludmila is raising up her hand as well. So just the last one questions, may I? Well, about assessing, as you stepped into this field, so do you think assessing Oracy is more complicated with adding some additional hurdles, difficulties in that, for example, some components like inclusiveness, professional skills, or some personal individual ideas? So in what do you think may influence in assessment of Oracy in this way? Do you think, well, am I right? Is there some additional components in that element?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think people have to have a clear idea of what they think they're trying to assess, and that's why the Oracy skills framework is important. And so you can see whether you're really assessing relatively objectively the kind of different skills, and that you've got some conception of what constitutes a good performance. But I think it's possible. As a can of worms, I think it is. It's a risky thing. But I think if you don't do it, two things about it. If you don't assess Oracy, then you can't help the students. You can't tell where they need to develop and what skills they've already got and what they need to develop. And the other thing, I think, which is that if a subject isn't assessed in education systems, it tends not to be treated as very important. So I think that's the other reason to assess Oracy, because it gives a status to the subject as we assess mathematical learning or how well you understand history or whatever.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So great, thank you for support as well. Thanks a lot. Sorry. Yeah.
It's totally okay. Yeah. So Ludmila, please.
Can I just say a few words, if you don't mind? I just want to thank.
Sorry. I have forgotten to unmute myself. This is what usually happens. Well, I would like to thank all the presenters for the insightful presentations and for that good deal of food for thought you have just given. And I wrote in the chat that your idea of using the word detective for those who are observing the process is just a wonderful thing. Because yeah,
sorry, I just say it's not ours. The talk detectives are out there in many forms.
Yeah, well, just in fact, when I just do these kind of activities, we usually call these people just observers. But this is not as intriguing and as motivating and engaging as detectives. Detectives will definitely add value to the work they do. Well, just the question is this one. From your experience, this goes to both Professor Mercer and Lisa and Sarah, just which of those ingredients of the framework you mentioned appeared to be the most difficult to develop? I mean, physical, cognitive, language, just what was the most challenging for you to deal with and for you to see the results of?
Would you like to go first?
No, you go first, because I think you've got the more recent direct experience of teaching these things.
So maybe just Professor Mercer will give the theoretical perspective of this, and you will just add some kind of practical insights from that.
Okay. I don't think any of them are particularly more difficult than others. I think it's just some are more obvious than others, in the sense that, you can see more easily whether someone's physical, voice projection is good, whether their body language is appropriate, and things like that. While it's a lot more subtle to see whether somebody's taking account of the needs of their audience, or they're working well in a group to listen to people and contribute. So I think the difference is in their sort of subtlety, and that probably takes a bit more understanding. Some things are obvious to see and some things aren't. But I don't think in terms of developing them, I don't think any of them's. I can't think why any of them's particularly more difficult to develop. But then I'll pass over to Lisa and Sarah then.
I agree. I think it really depends on the group and what sort of objectives and aims you have. And also your own skill set to have. I don't think it's a difficulty for the students. Obviously, the linguistic strand is one that we're very familiar with as language teachers, so that would probably be relatively easy for us as teachers. But I think the one that we found challenging and very rewarding was the social emotional strand, particularly after lockdown, where we felt we needed, more contact between students. So I think it really depends on where you're coming from with your students, and we try to identify their needs more than anything else in this period, and then focus on those. But I agree. I wouldn't find that any area is really challenging. I'd say, you know, it's fun.
And also because they're all the four strands are interlinked, they're interrelated. So when you're necessarily focusing on one, you can also be focusing on all four at the same time. So that's another. So it's sometimes quite difficult actually to say, okay, I'm only going to focus on that strand. I think Enrica wanted to say
Enrica, now you can.
Yes, Enrica's
right.
Enrica's our teacher, our coordinator of the project.
No, I think I did very little last year, but I was grateful. I felt privileged for being there. And I want to thank the organizers and the speakers tonight. Great admirer of Professor Mercer and of Sarah and Lisa. And I just want to say about last year really was amazing to see students work so passionately, you know, being so engaged. And at the beginning being a bit shy and, you know, perhaps they were a bit intimidated, because I think initially, you know, oral tests are a bit of an issue, as Sarah said before. And in a way, it is a bit limiting as an approach. So we really need initially to develop the culture of Oracy that Sarah was talking about, you know, and really spread professional development. So my question would be to the three speakers, you know, what can we do, you know, to really think of Oracy as a subject within schools and build a kind of a school network as in, you know, as the next step, and implement professional development, because I think that's what we need, because otherwise, you know, Oracy initially, and I don't know in other countries, but initially it's kind of will end up be isolated or confined to just a project, you know, a project activity, and so not available to all the students. Whereas I think that one of the main things of Oracy is that it is inclusive and it helps diversity, it helps students who don't have the same opportunity as others, you know. So I really would like some advice, because this year, for example, I was really, really sorry that we couldn't continue the project, you know, and students were so sorry. They were asking for it the whole year, you know. They were asking for Sarah and Lisa all the time. They said they would come in the afternoon. I mean, the response, you know, to see them so eager to continue, you know, it's just incredible for me. But unfortunately, leadership and policymakers, as Professor Mercer previously mentioned, you know, are a hindrance, an obstacle very often, you know, and we don't know how to get around that, you know, how to get the ministry to understand that. I mean, how can you teach? They introduce civic education and citizenship. How can you actually teach that if you don't teach Oracy first? I mean, how can a citizen be a citizen if it's not given, or she's not given, you know, the right Oracy skills, you know? And so I'd like to hear from the three speakers. I know I have said quite a lot to unpack, but you know, just a piece of advice from each of you would be fantastic.
Well, the problems you face are ones that people face in many countries. So I'm afraid we face, you know, it's not as though we are exempt from those problems either. We've just had recently a parliamentary inquiry into Oracy, which we were part of, meaning that some members of parliament have insisted that this needs to be given more attention in the education system. And they set this up and they took evidence on it, and they're trying to influence the actual government ministers to make it more important. And that we're making a little bit of progress, but not as much as you'd think. And what we find is the level of teachers, I think that they are all convinced it's important. It's the levels up above that, through policymakers, head teachers sometimes. And they're the ones, and all we can do is try and keep pushing the evidence to show that one of the things I think that can win them over is by saying, look, we're not just saying, oh God, this is another thing you've got to do as well as teaching maths, history, you know, everything else. What we're saying is, if you do Oracy, the maths, history teaching and so on will work better anyway. You know, that's the message I think that we can win on, by saying it'll actually help. It'll help them do better in those older subjects if they're using talk effectively in those subjects. And what's more, as you've said, you're training citizens for the world. And in some countries, as I say, I mean, Estonia, Wales, you know, they're hearing this message to some extent in Norway as well, Singapore. These things are being heard. And I think it's a case of us just trying to make that argument that it's not arguing for just another subject, but something that will actually improve the quality of education. And I hope that kind of, and the other message that helps win them over is that it's an employment skill, that you're actually preparing young people to be better skilled in the world of employment. And I don't like to think of it just as that. It makes it sound very sort of, you know, just training them for work. But it is true. And I think we can perhaps win them over by saying we're training them, you know, we are actually giving them skills that will help them in society and in their work as well. I mean, in the UK, the only students who've been for years getting Oracy education are those in the very elite private schools. And they're all the ones that the people who are running the country went to, you know, like Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and all those people. And, you know, it's no surprise that they're the ones who feel they can be members of Parliament and speak in public and do all this, because they got Oracy education. And all the other people, like our children, you know, sometimes there's even a conspiracy theory approach which says they don't want Oracy education for our children because then they take over.
Yes. So, there would be a riot.
Yeah. Or they'd just become MPs and be better than them. So I think these are the messages you can do, is to say that it will, you know, it improves the quality of education across subjects if you do it, because you're learning through talk more effectively, and also you're preparing them for work and society. Yeah.
I agree totally, I think particularly with the conspiracy theory.
Yes, absolutely.
I heard that Eton, the boys' public school in the UK, actually invested something like £20 million on building a debate chamber.
That's right.
It's just like Parliament, so that these children, when they're 10, 11 years old, they stand up and say, you know, I'm the Prime Minister. And I think they've had something like 9 Prime Ministers in their history.
Yeah, that's right.
College. And it just shows that they are preparing these for a different kind of citizenship to the rest of us. So I think there's a lot of mileage. But I definitely say, Enrique, from a practical level, I mean, obviously joining discussion groups, getting teachers sort of familiar with what the benefits and what the impact of Oracy is, and reading documents from places like the UK that's probably a bit further ahead on the Oracy journey, let's say, with the parliamentary group. And I think Twitter is a great place to read and share your voice about Oracy. I think it's because of the way it actually works with these like short exchanges. There's a lot of conversation going on, and you can talk with a lot of people about Oracy on Twitter. And I also think with organisations like these, like TESOL Italy, TESOL Ukraine, TESOL International, you know, through conferences, conventions, etc. I mean, Italy is a grassroots organisation that's been around for 46 years and has brought a lot of change in language learning in Italy. And I think through these organisations, you can bring change and you can influence policymakers and school headmasters, governors, or whoever. But obviously, you have to involve management if you want to, you know, make change across the school, which would really, really make a difference. I just wanted to say one thing. I read the work of a book by Hashi Mohammed. I'll send a reference to that. Who is it? It was a refugee from Somalia who came to the UK. And it's a fascinating book. And there's a chapter about language where he mentions his Oracy skills and the fact that he came from an oral tradition of his Somali family, and how he managed to succeed in the UK because of his Oracy skills. He was able to he became from being a refugee to becoming a barrister at the law courts in London. But it is actually fascinating, and it shows you through a practical example of the benefits of an Oracy education and how you really can make a change for people. I hope that's answered you a little bit.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
May I ask the question? Sorry. Well, first of all, I would like to say you great thank you, because you have opened a new perspective on the integrated skills, which Professor Mercer, you have announced what I wanted to say, that for me, I see it as like a generic job-related skill. If a person with a higher education, I think he or she should have highly developed Oracy skills. But my questions my question rooted in the topics, because you remember I'm an ESP teacher. We have limited time for teaching and learning. And thinking to your presentation, I'm trying to find out where it can find implication in Ukrainian ESP classrooms. And I see, for example, we can start in module socializing, because it will be built on communicating on very easy topics, you know, which is very close for students, to their study, exchanging information, and so on and so forth. And then you remember in module 3, we will come to presentations. But I would like to ask the question to 3 of you, maybe who chooses the topics for developing Oracy skills? How do you build it step by step? You see what I mean?
By topics, do you mean content on an ESP?
Absolutely. Not ESP, but what you do in your classrooms. It's okay at least to find out what you start with. You see?
Well,
simple, very close to students, then coming, or your students propose topics for discussions.
No, in my experience, which isn't as vast as Professor Mercer's, that we have a curriculum to follow with certain topics in the curriculum, and then we would develop our Oracy skills. That would be the approach. Oracy would be the approach to working on those topics. So they would be, we would be feeding in facts and information, and the students would be carrying on their discussions, but we would be working to our content curriculum. I don't know if that answers your question slightly.
That's what I meant, what we do in our classrooms. And one more question, it is about body language, gestures, and adequate behavior. If you remember, we also have within the aims. And here, for example, I always say to our students, because in Ukrainian culture, when listening to the lecture, everyone will keep in still, and even listening to you, we do not need body language too much. But I know when in England and the teachers and everyone use body language, then you saw with your head that you understand what is said. That is why, should we pay attention to this cultural difference somehow? And if yes, where can we find the materials? Videos, for example, or for example, to find out, because it's very difficult. If you do not travel, you haven't ever been to Italy, you can't teach your students how to behave in Italy, in England. Yeah, of course, I was in England, for example, in Germany and France. So I a little bit know from my, to be a detective, you observing how people behave in the countries. You see what I mean? The problem is materials. Even if we understand, we can incorporate in our courses, but where can we sitting here, being here in front of the computer in Ukraine, where can I find the materials for my students for Ukrainian? I want them also to be successful and to make their career and to make maybe in Europe, maybe abroad, of course, but for the sake of and for the Ukrainian development. You see what I mean? Thank you ever so much for any answers.
Would you like to go first, Professor Mercer?
Yeah, I think it is important to help people learn those cultural differences. But I think you're right, it's hard to do so. I mean, obviously one way that we all learn nowadays more about these variations is through watching films, you know, and television, even if it's subtitled. You can gain quite a lot of impression of the way conversations go. For example, my wife and I, Lynn Dawes, who's a member of Oricy Cambridge, we've been very great fans of the Italian series Commissario Montalbano, and we watch all of those. We've watched all of them lots of times, and so we have a much clearer idea of how those kind of people, you know, how people have conversations. And if you compare the way they act with a British police program, you know, you will see a much more use of body language and what seems to us much more extreme sort of versions of expression than you would get in a British program, where it would all be much more quieter. And we have noticed in Oracy projects we've had in different countries that how these things kind of matter. For example, when we've had a project in Mexico, and one of that we talked about discussion guidelines. One of the things we say in our discussion guidelines is it's important that you can express disagreement, yeah. And we say, because if you don't express disagreement, you won't resolve any different opinions, and you might not get the best solution in a group. Now, we say that with the British students, and that's not particularly problematic. But when we went to Japan and to Mexico, it's considered very rude to disagree expressly with somebody else, especially if they're a little bit more senior than you. And so you have to take that into account when you're asking students to do this, and think of how can you do it in that culture that will still enable exploratory talk and a good discussion without breaking those rules. While on the other hand, when we want to go to the Netherlands, it's the opposite. I don't know if you know any Dutch people, but again, if you watch Dutch programs or you hear them there, if you ask Dutch people, they just disagree like this. No, that's wrong. You know, that's completely wrong. You know, and it's not considered rude. You know, they're much more direct. And so those kind of variations are things that students need to learn. We need to learn as language learners. And I think one of the few ways we can do it is through the media. You know, it's through films and television. But that's not really any real substitute for what you know for traveling, isn't it? If I want to know how Ukrainians really talk together, I need to go to Ukraine and listen.
I also think
you need to come to Ukraine.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
TESOL Ukraine will invite you.
Yeah, it's
and
a
we
good
will
idea.
be happy to participate and to see you face to face, not via online. It will be really great.
I would like that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think also we shouldn't really sort of worry too much about body language, because I think we should all really be developing our own body language. You know, just we should be supporting, we should be trying to communicate our message. I know I use my hands a lot, and I think I picked it up when I've lived in Italy for many years, and in this part of Italy, or particularly the family of my husband, he uses his hands a lot, so I use my hands a lot. And then when I went back to the UK, you know, my grandmother said, "Would you please sit on your hands?" Because and I was like, well, I can't really talk anymore without using my hands. It's become part of my way of expressing myself, and I like using my hands to express myself. But, you know, some people don't. So I don't think we should say this is the way to communicate your body language. I think things like, you know, eye contact's quite important, or projecting your voice. But if you have a very quiet voice like my colleague, you might not want to project your voice. So it is a choice. And I think watching Netflix has opened up a whole world of opportunities for us to observe different nationalities in action. We can hear them, we can see them, we can see their body language. All sorts of people, even current politicians who have been on television in the Ukraine. I watched the TV series to see what the body language was like. So I think it's fascinating, but I don't think it should be something that we're actually teaching body language. We should be really like just making them aware that it varies from culture to culture.
I think you're right that we shouldn't be teaching, you don't need to teach them exactly how to do it in a different culture necessarily. But I do think it's worth people being aware of how they're using body language. I mean, like, if you look at the videos we have on the Oracy framework site, we've got some examples of good and not so good presentation of 11-year-old children, for comparison. And there's one boy there who's very good, but one of the things he's not so good at is he keeps moving around like this, you know, and his talk's great and he's confident, he's clear. But one of the feedback things was you just need to stop jumping around, you know. So it would help him to tell him that, I think. He can then decide if he wants to change it or not, but I think he might not be aware that he's doing it, you know.
I ask my students to nod in their Zoom sessions. Can you just nod and you know, let me know that you're when you're listening or you find it interesting, because if and then they realize that, you know, the nodding gets them through my lesson. But whether they're listening or not, I don't know.
That was my question comes from, because I remember the first guest lecturers, they were lecturing to my students. And you know, I told you, according to the Ukrainian culture, if I'm listening to you, I will attentively looking into your eyes and doing nothing. And then this professor came to me and asked, Irina, do they understand what I say? Yes, they say to my classes, they were so brilliant lectures, so interesting material, so many ideas. But and he asked me, that is why my question comes from. Yeah. Why they do not react in any way to my what I am telling? That is why I know that such elements, at least, you need to know. I do not insist. I always say to my students, if you are an introvert, do not start to use your body language, because you will be like puppet. Because you can't express if you are extrovert like me, you will use your body language, but you need to look naturally. And then again, the next questions come from, is it a good idea to take the videos of students talking, for example, starting from the very beginning, and to propose them to make self-observation? For example, that is my question. You see, I'm bringing you to this question. Sorry to be so maybe active, but I really like your idea and this perspective. I'm rather, Marina said, I have millions of ideas.
I think, yes, I think any observations that you can then share back with your students as well to reflect on are like gold dust, really. So I definitely think, and there are, as Mercer said on the website, you can find lots of examples, and it's really interesting to analyze and to watch, and then to sort of feedback to colleagues as well. So I would, if they're comfortable, of course, with being filmed, that would be. Yeah.
There's some really, if anybody wants it, I can send a link. I didn't think about it. Scotland is also moving ahead on Oracy quite well, and they're developing things, and they've got a great resource for teachers up there, which is examples of children working in groups, either well or not so well, and they've got really good examples of discussion work up in groups there, which you can find as well. And I think, you know, it helps other students to see a group of students speaking, and they can say, well, do I act like that? Do we behave like that, and so on. So I think those things are great. They're hard to get because you've got to get permission, haven't you, from the students and the parents and everything. You know, you can't just put them up. So there's not as many as probably we would like because of those conditions that have to be met, you know, but they are there.
Thank you. And the last question, ladies, you have mentioned the project. If I'm not mistaken, and you invited and you have some ideas, and maybe we will have some separate session, because I do not know, maybe we're short of time, but it's very interesting if you share somewhere in our, for example, TESOL Ukraine newsletter, for the universities, schools, maybe we will join, because, for example, you remember we had regional learning hub. It is especially for these purposes, to promote English learning, and maybe we can some kind to make some piloting there, and invite people. No, after, of course, after these work conditions, when we come back to our classrooms, and it will be, we have a special territory, so-called, for local community, where people can come, not only our students. And we can, for example, try to pilot some things, and I think it will be very interesting. How do you think?
Yeah, I think Cambridge Oracy are your people for piloting, and yes. But I'd say why don't you organise an Oracy conference and get some people over with some ideas after when things are better, when the situation has improved, because that's a great way of sort of kick-starting a movement, let's say, in the Ukraine. And we'll definitely come, because I love the Ukraine. So,
and I've never been. So.
Yeah, so there you go. Okay, I think we should hand back to Marina, because I think the teachers might be getting a bit. Yes, time might be getting on. Is that right, Marina? Marina still looks happy, so maybe we're not too far over time.
No, everything is fine. Thank you so much. And you know, it's like in every type of communication. Our first sessions were shorter, like warming ups, yeah. And now we have already warmed up enough to make longer, to have longer sessions.
Yeah.
It just means that we got acquainted with each other so well. Yeah,
we know each other. We know each other better, so I think we're a bit relaxed.
Yeah. So we don't need any warm-ups anymore. So we just talk. So thank you so much. And that was a great experience. Probably you remember that we will be talking about it at our last session, that every year we have a topic for teacher development institutes in TESOL Ukraine. And I feel that we have already found the topic for the next year. It's so fresh because, you know, every year we are looking for something that is of interest for many groups. And it looks like this topic will be a perfect one.
Right. Marina, this will be one of the thematic areas of our next convention, annual convention, Oracy Skills, promoting hope in ELT, where O stands for Oracy Skill. So maybe, you know, we hope that you can participate for sure. Some of you can also be speakers at our conventions. I will send you the code.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, so, and it also coincides with our president, Elena Yenko, suggested to the American embassy, because our suggestion when they asked us what they can do for TESOL Ukraine, like Lena's suggestion was to provide the cycle of lectures on speaking. And like we didn't know the word Oracy at that time. Now we know already that it's about Oracy, not about speech making, because at that time we called it like speech making, like making speeches. But now.
Oh, good. That's wonderful.
So thank you so much. And next time we'll have a session with Ludmila Hnapovska. She asked a question today, and Sergei Petrenko, and they will be talking about ESP and EMI in Ukraine. I hope it will be very interesting. And now, you know, we already were trying to make our sessions shorter, but we'll see what happens next Thursday.
It's impossible, Marina, because it's so interesting, it's so refreshing, upgrading, updating, it's inspiring. That is why, you see, we can say good night to each other, but we will.
I would just read that it's very interesting to see different people and to hear different points of view. So, and listen to different ideas. So, great thanks to our friends for sharing their experience.
I just have a very small remark. Like many years ago, one of my relatives, she decided to change the place of living. And she went first to Italy. And she lived there she was young then, and she lived there for 5 years. And then she decided that she doesn't want to live in Italy because Italians are so much like Ukrainians. And living in Italy is the same as living in Ukraine. Really? Like, and so every time I come to Italy, I remember this remark, you know, and probably now we see why it's so true. Yeah. So. Okay. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Thank you.
See you next Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Arrivederci.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Arrivederci.
Bye. Looking forward to meet you on Thursday.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and bye-bye.